Welcome to the Sober Living Stories podcast. This podcast is dedicated to sharing stories of sobriety. We shine a spotlight on individuals who have faced the challenges of alcoholism and addiction and are today living out their best lives sober. Each guest has experienced incredible transformation and are here to share their story with you. I'm Jessica Stepanovic, your host. Join me each week as guests from all walks of life share their stories to inspire and provide hope to those who need it most. Welcome to another episode of the Sober Living Stories podcast. Today's guest, Cheyenne, shares her remarkable story of overcoming an alcoholic upbringing wrought with trauma, leading to her own battle with addiction. She's currently working on her memoir, Wasted, offering a raw and unfiltered narrative of her life. Cheyenne reflects on the challenges of her past, discussing her journey through foster homes and the strength it took to break free from the cycle of addiction. Welcome, Cheyenne. It's so good to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Jessica. Thank you for inviting me.
I know you had mentioned you came from an alcoholic home and you had some experience in foster care, which led to some situations that brought you to your own addiction. And could you just kind of start from the beginning and take us through your childhood and then to the point where it became problematic for you and how you walked through that?
Yes, absolutely. My pleasure. So just kind of start in the beginning, like I mentioned before, born and raised in Redding, California. I was born at Mercy Hospital on May 19th, 1983, to a single mother. And she was an alcoholic and a drug addict. She also struggled very significantly with mental illness. I've met my father once. So I didn't have a dad growing up. So that'll be kind of part of my story. And I'll go a little bit more in depth about the impact that my mom actually had on my story and then on eventually like my recovery. But so born to a single mom, grew up, went to school, just kind of the norm in my household was there was a mom that was drunk all the time, right? She was drunk all the time. She was on pills. I remember as a little girl, climbing up on the counter and trying to find something to eat. I would often find her passed out. She was very, like I mentioned, she did struggle with mental illness. Back in those days, it was very challenging from what I understand from family and friends that I've talked to that were there in that journey that we didn't know a lot about mental illness the way that we do now, right? And so it was hard to medicate her properly, get her the right treatment, those kind of things. And so she self-medicated, right? And as a result of that, she was very ill. And so she was very violent. She was incredibly violent. I was actually just sharing with someone the other day that, unfortunately, I don't have a lot of wonderful childhood memories. My mom used to chase me around the house with a meat cleaver because she thought that it was funny. And I would scared run into my bedroom and hold my body against the door and she would slide the knife underneath because she lived in a very alternate reality. She would hallucinate, she was delusional, take that and also add substances. And so she thought that it was comical and funny and she drove a lot when she was under the influence too, and so my shining lights really in my childhood were my grandma. Right. My grandmother, who was my mom's mom, would come in the wee hours of the night and pick me up when my mom was passed out, or she would come and take me for the weekend. I spent a lot of time at my grandmother's house when I was little. And so she passed when I was 9 years old. And I'll never forget feeling like, oh man, my safety net is gone. What am I going to do now? Right. I'm on my own because my mom her relationship with her mom was very tumultuous and it was hard. She had a lot of resentment, a lot of pain. And so she resented my grandmother essentially for wanting to take care of me and sort of being the healthier adult person in that scenario, as well as my aunt, who I'm still very close to and actually played a huge role in my recovery. And still to this day does. She also plays a huge role in my walk with faith as well. So my mom's sister. So they were kind of the people in my life that were constantly showing up, making sure there was food in the house. And a lot of the times when I was removed by CPS, I would go and live with my aunt because
Okay.
she was next of kin. She was, a healthy, responsible, functioning adult. And I was, she had two kids of her own, so she knew how to parent. And so I was in and out of foster homes quite a bit from probably about age 5 to 11 in that. So it was either I would go to my aunt's or I would go to a foster home, just kind of depending on the season of life, if my aunt wasn't able to take me on or whatever the case may be. Uh,
Mhm.
and typically the cycle was that CPS would come, they would see that my mom was not okay. They would see there was no food and I was dirty and all of these different things. And then they would take me and a week or two would go by or a month. And then my mom would get a job and she would get sober and then she would have her house together. Um, and then they would bring me home and then it would start all over again. Right. It was like
Okay.
this vicious
Mhm.
cycle. Um, and I went to meetings with my mom as a little
Mhm.
girl. The primary meeting place in my hometown, I remember sitting on the stage and coloring as a little girl while she was in meetings. I remember sitting in the half measures room while people shuffled in and out and got coffee. And so as a person later, when I came into recovery, there was a tenderness in my heart around that particular room. There's meetings all over,
Mhm.
but that particular meeting spot was as an adult woman now trying to
Wow.
get
Mhm.
sober. So it came full circle is essentially my point. And so then we had a family friend who was been in my life since I was 2 years old. She was very good friends with my aunt. They worked together. She came to all the family functions. And she didn't have children, but she was pretty well off and had her life structured to take on a child. And so at age 11, what happened was CPS kind of basically said, we're done. Unfortunately, we're not
Uh-huh.
going to be able to continue to do this. We're taking her permanently. And so my aunt and this other woman decided they would co-guardian me. And I kind of just tell everyone that I was adopted because it's complex to try to explain to people, well, I'm co-guardian and then my aunt and this other woman. So when you're just generally sort of sharing in a general way with people, I just say I was adopted because it's easier.
Right.
So this woman took me on at 11, and by the time I was 11 years old, I hadn't started using substances yet, but I was depressed. I was
Mhm.
anxious. I was lost. I was broken. I was scared. I didn't understand why my mom continued to drink and use. Um, and I was traumatized. I
Sure.
watched my mom hurt herself, hurt me, both physically, emotionally, and it was hard. And so I started living with this woman. I went to school. I was in junior high and she really didn't know, bless her heart. She didn't know what the heck to do with this, broken, traumatized, emotionally detached kid. And so
Right.
she did her best and she took me all over the world. I've been to Europe and I've been to Hawaii and Mexico and Spain and Paris and just she traveled. And so what she thought would be helpful would be, let's show her the world and explore and have all these experiences. But there was always a hole, right?
Mhm.
There's always a
Mhm.
hole inside of me. And it didn't matter how much love I got, how many trips we went on, how many awesome shopping trips we took, all these things. It just never felt good. Right, and so I lived
Right.
with her, until I was about 16, 17, when I moved out, but just to backtrack a little bit, so I do junior high. At this point, my mom had moved out of the state, um, and she had hooked up with some guy, and they were, like, starting their life over, and she had moved to South Dakota, and so I was completely estranged from her. Um, Prior to that,
Okay.
she, like, showed up at this woman's house with a gun and had, like, threatened to kidnap me and take me, and it just got to be a lot. And so,
Mhm.
so she left, and then, I struggled. I was so resentful. I was so angry. I was such a bitter kid. And I just wanted to be loved, accepted, and needed. And so when I was 14 years old, I smoked my first cigarette, and I drank my first beer. And I'll never forget. I was a cheerleader at the time. I had went with a couple girlfriends after the football game, and we were like standing outside the 7-Eleven, and smoked my first cigarette, right? And then went to someone's house and they were partying, and I drank my first beer, and I got pretty drunk. I mean, I was like tiny little bitty girl, drank a beer and a half or something, and I was wasted. And so, but it's like when we talk about this idea of like that sense of ease and comfort, right? There it was.
Right.
I finally found it. Yeah. And
Right.
it was the release. It was the release of everything, all the emotion, all the pain, all the loss, was gone, and I
Right.
chased that forever. And so, of course, I hooked up with the kids in school, the bad kids, if you will, the ones that were smoking weed and drinking and partying and going to keggers, and that was my scene. I would do whatever it took. I would sneak out at night and go off in the bushes and smoke weed out of a empty soda can, and I would smoke cigarettes out the window of my bedroom, and I would lie, and the lying began, right? And,
Mhm.
and what happened at age 16 was I found methamphetamine, right?
Okay.
So the type of people that I surrounded myself got progressively worse, right?
Right.
And I know now that they're just fellow addicts, but they were also doing all kinds of stuff. All my girlfriends in school had 6 different boyfriends. They were all very promiscuous. They were all having sex.
How old were you when you found methamphetamine?
16. So I was, with my girlfriend, and we were at her boyfriend's house, and everyone was partying and doing their thing. And the guy said, "Hey, do you want to try this?" And I just kind of went for it. And then it was like really, really over, right? I thought I had found my release with alcohol. And, um, and I'll just be really candid with you that it was revealed to me in this last year after almost 20, over 20 years of sobriety, that my first addiction is men, right? That's
Okay.
my first love, right? So was constantly looking for boyfriends, always had a boyfriend, always wanted to be with someone. I always needed to have some man or boy around me. And I would do whatever it took to please them and make them happy. So in that moment, I was like, oh man, this cool older guy wants to offer me drugs, so I'm gonna do it. And
Mhm.
and my life just spiraled out of control after that. There's whole weeks of my life that I don't remember. I eventually moved out of my adopted mother's house, and it wasn't sort of a planned event. It was like in the midst of a methamphetamine high. I hadn't slept in a week. I showed up, I got all my stuff. She's there crying and sort of devastated. And I just left, and I just couch surfed, and I just stayed with people, and I did the things. I did all the things. I sold my body for drugs, and I, lied and stole, and it got really, really, really bad, really dark, and very fast, I would say. I know now that the reason that it progressed so rapidly is had I gone on one more day, I would have died. I just know
Mhm.
that. And so by the time I was 18 years old, I had dropped out of high school, and I was living with a man twice my age, and he was physically abusing me on a daily basis. And I was sticking needles in my arm, and I was drinking every single day, and I weighed 83 pounds. No job, no money, no nothing, just scrounging up change every day for trying to figure out a way to get to the store and get some alcohol or get some drugs. And the people were at this, to look back on it now, they were terrifying. So I did that, and then basically what ended up happening is I ran. I tried to run from that relationship, and then I would come back and I ran. Um,
Just
Go
you mentioned that you found methamphetamine when you were 16. And
ahead.
oftentimes with myself, I think of, well, this kind of occurred in my 20s and early 30s. But lately I've been thinking about, no, it started in high school. That's when we have the first interaction, the experience, and oh, that's the feeling, and the relationships that go bad. And, so that's a real pivotal group I am thinking lately to address for other options as to what kids can use to feel a release that you're talking about
Yeah.
without using drugs or alcohol, and having that additional decade of destruction for them. It's a group that I would say isn't addressed enough. So I'm
Absolutely.
glad you shared that.
Thank you for that. And the truth is, for me, by the time that I got into harder drugs, and I didn't know, but apparently I kind of came late to the party. All of the people that I had to, junior high with, they were all already doing heroin. And,
Oh, yeah.
by the time they were 13, 14 years old. Right. And so
I don't think it's gotten better as far as when, yeah,
yeah,
it hasn't gotten better. I think it's only accelerated, so whatever's happening in middle school now,
yeah, absolutely. I agree. Yeah. So there I was, 18 years old at the bottom. And I had said the people that I, was in relationship with, the drug dealers that I had and those kind of things, they were really bad. They were really scary people. And as I was reflecting, I'll just share with you, last night I was kind of just doing my timeline and figuring my pieces out. I really had this like spiritual experience moment last night sitting at my kitchen table where I was like, man, I've always kind of known that. Like I've known in early sobriety, there's been pockets of time where I was like, wow. But I just had this like additional moment where I thought, man, God has always had his hand on my life. He has always had his hand on my life because I should be dead. That's the truth. I should have been killed or OD'd or whatever. Right. So basically I had this friend. I struggle to use that word, but we'll just use it for the purpose of this conversation. Using drugs with, right? And she was, knee deep in the outlaw biker scene. And so I like went to live with her and we were running amok and doing all the crazy things. And she was sort of trying to train me in how to live in the outlaw biker world. And so I had left the abusive relationship. I was hanging out with her, and I apologize. Some of this stuff is a little gray because there's still pieces of it that I don't remember a lot of. But basically they, her and her boyfriend had kind of decided to sell me to one of the bikers, an older man, a man old enough to be my grandfather. And, I was going to go. And in that culture, women are like, they have one purpose, right? And so I was supposed to go live with him and be his little housewife and clean for him and give him sex and, do whatever he said and ride on the back of his bike and all these different things. And to be fair, this guy, he was pretty cool. He was a hardcore biker. He was an outlaw, but he like was sober. He didn't use drugs. He took me to some different meetings. He tried to help me a little bit. But I was just not ready. I was not ready. And so I ended up leaving that situation with that same girlfriend, and we like drove to Hollywood in the wee hours of the night because we were like, we're gonna go, like, total fantastical thinking, like we're gonna go start our new lives, we're gonna run away from all this chaos, we're gonna get clean. No, that's not what happened. What happened was we got there, we got robbed the first night we were there. We were invited to participate in some orgy. It was awful. And we got high. And then I finally just called my adopted mom from a payphone in the lobby of a hotel in Hollywood, and said, go ahead.
So you called your adoptive mom that you had said you had walked in and grabbed your things.
Yes.
She was crying. Is it that woman? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So I just kind of called her and said, I'm terrified. I don't know where I am. I have no money. I need help. I'm scared and I want to come home. And so she sent me money for a bus ticket and I left. Right. And so because of some of the decisions that I had made prior to leaving, they were looking, the bikers were looking for me. I had not made good choices. And so I was kind of hiding for my life, essentially. So my friend came back with me. She left and went back to her relationship and did her thing. And I went to treatment. I went to drug and alcohol treatment for the first time. I don't believe that I was ready to be done all the way. I was in hiding and it felt like a safe, warm place to be, right? Where are they going to look for you? They're not going to look for you in drug and alcohol treatment. That's for sure. So I started like going to meetings and doing the program and went to the classes. And that's actually where I met my.
It's about that. They came in where we were. So like there and anyway,
absolutely. They're like in the so I went to treatment and man, it was rough. I'll never forget the director of the program, who has since retired, and I love her so much and I'm so blessed by her. I mean, she essentially helped save my life. I came in, right? So it's mixed. It was a mixed rehab, so men and women. So you've got all these guys kind of like fresh out of prison, right? And then I come in and I've got these like, I'm like 90 pounds, knee high, black patent leather boots, mini skirt, tank top that was way too low cut, all this stuff, right? I looked gross and I was all slimy. And I went and sat down in her office, and I'll never forget this pivotal moment where she said, "You look like a prostitute." And I said, "Yeah, yeah, uh-huh." And so I changed my clothes, I took a shower, I ate, and like when we talked about like the sleep, I remember I think I slept, right? And because you can go, there's a portion of it where you can go to detox for 3 to 5 days. And I lied essentially and said like I hadn't used in the last 24 hours because I didn't want to go to detox. I wanted to go into program. And, I don't know what I was thinking then. Now looking back, that sounds ideal to be able to sleep and eat for 3 days. But I met a boy because that's what I do. Right. And I got a 6 foot rule. That's a thing in treatment with this one in particular, where you have to stay 6 feet away from people of the opposite sex. Right. And so I got into a relationship. He was cute. He smelled nice, whatever. And so long story short, I left treatment on a pass, went to Wairika, California with him, where he's from. We got really drunk. I don't remember almost the entire weekend, and then came back. Obviously, the counselors knew that we had left together. We both got kicked out of the program, and I went to live with him in Wairika, California for a year. I don't know if you know anything about Wairika, but it's like this tiny little podunk, one road town. There's like,
I've never heard of it actually.
There's probably a reason. There's like, it's like a grocery store and a gas station, and that's it. Right. And it's, predominantly populated with Native Americans. There's a reservation there. So he was Native American. We lived on the reservation with him. And then his mom had this like 3 bedroom fifth wheel in the middle of nowhere. Literally, it was like in the middle of nowhere. There was junk cars everywhere. They had like 16 dogs. And I lived there with him and his 8 siblings for a year. Right. Wow. And drank. And he, again, was physically violent. He was a blackout drinker. And so I ended up leaving that relationship, and I went to live with his aunt on the Indian reservation because she was like probably the healthiest of the entire family. She kind of took me under her wing. I'll never forget, I was going to, Narcotics Anonymous and picking up chips for clean time because I wasn't using drugs, but I would then go back to the house and drink, right? Drink alcohol.
Yeah, well, and so how'd that work out? Because I mean, I know a lot of people think that that's it. That works. And I heard somebody say something once, which was absolutely right on. And so they're like, well, you can't drink. You shouldn't drink alcohol if you're giving up drugs. And he's like, why? And they said, because when you drink, you will eventually get drunk and go search out your drug of choice. So it is not going to work. And I was like, wow, that's why,
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's got to be total abstinence. I'm just the kind of addict that I am. I can't do a little bit of marijuana maintenance and stay, and then not drink. If I'm smoking weed, I'm going to get real thirsty, and vice versa. Right. And so that's just what I have to do. And so I was doing that, and it was total insanity. Right. When we talk about step one, like powerless and unmanageable, man, I was like so enthralled in my addiction. And so, of course, I did what I knew how to do, which was hook up with the drug addicts on the Indian reservation. All of a sudden, I was, now I was just running around the housing unit, doing meth with people and sleeping on couches of people I didn't even know their first name. And I was doing all this craziness. And then in June of 2003, I was living with my ex-boyfriend's aunt, and I got a phone call that my mother had committed suicide. So that is the most pivotal part of my story, because I truly believe that was my divine intervention. I believe that God used that moment to get me sober, truly. So she had still been living in South Dakota. Like, we had a horrible relationship. She would call me every once in a while, and I would just, spew venom on her. And
why do you think that was the moment? What happened there for you? Was it like a freedom from her and that relationship, or what was
again, I don't know that I don't remember having this pivotal moment where I was like, oh my gosh, she killed herself because of drugs and alcohol. I don't want that for myself. I need to change my life. It wasn't like that. It was more like this is the most traumatic thing that's ever happened to me. How am I going to get through this? And then I kind of think, like, when I look back on it, it literally is like God had me in the palm of his hand, and he just like picked me up and delivered me back to my aunt in Redding, California. Right. So I proceeded to get loaded for another month or so after the death of my mom. And my aunt had sent me a bus ticket, and I came home, and it was just this very like spiritual experience. Like, I don't even really remember the bus ride. I don't remember anything. I remember getting off the bus and seeing my aunt, and she just broke, and she hugged me, and she was like, "You're coming home with me. We're going to get you clean, whatever it takes." And then that was kind of the moment where I was like, I'll do whatever I have to do. So it took a little while to kind of get there, but it was like, yeah, it was just God. It was God, right? And so, yeah, it's powerful.
It is. It really is. Because literally, if that was the most traumatic thing, you wouldn't have survived.
Right.
So that was a life-saving moment.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So, it was off to the races, right? I came home and we buried my mom, and family came, and we had a funeral service, and we did the things. And my aunt was, she's just the light. That woman is the light. She ushered me. She stewarded me back to God, right? She fed me well. I slept. I got on the waiting list to go back to the same treatment center. And they just kind of said, like, "Are you ready? Are you ready to be done?" And I said, "Yeah, I think so." There had been a shift. There had been a psychic change. All I ever thought about when I was in treatment the first time was getting loaded. That's all I thought about, was how do I get high? How do I get high? How do I get high? And this time the obsession was removed. It's because of God. That's, I don't want to try to rationalize it or put too many words on it. It just is. His presence was there the whole time. And so it was removed. And so I got into another relationship because I was still very sick. And, and I remember going to a meeting. I went to a meeting. So just to backtrack a little bit. So I got off the bus. I went home with my aunt. Like a couple days later, I like, while I was waiting for treatment, because they didn't have a bed yet, I went to a woman's Tuesday night candlelight meeting at the treatment center. And people from the outside and people that are in treatment can come. And it's kind of an open meeting. And across the room in the corner is my now sponsor. And I saw her, and I had met her in treatment when I was in treatment the first time. And it was divine intervention. I just went up to her and said, "Listen, my mom died. I'm here. I'm trying to be back in treatment, and I need you to sponsor me." And she said, "Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it." And so she would come out to my aunt's house, and we would do step work together, and she would take me to meetings. I didn't have a car, I didn't have a job, I didn't have anything. And God bless her, because my aunt and uncle lived like way out. They lived about 30 minutes outside of town. So it was a little bit of a trek for her. And an example of like what it is to be of service.
Right. And, I'm not surprised by that, because I've seen that throughout the years, just people showing up in unbelievable circumstances, like going the distance, showing up when it's inconvenient, just being completely there for you. And thank God for that woman. Now you're still with her 20 years later. Is that true? Yeah.
It's a little bit of a rarity to have had the same sponsor for as long as I've had one. So people are like,
yes,
like, what have you done? What did you blackmail her with?
Well, it's consistent and so stable. And it's just incredible to have someone that knows you that well, and that's completely for you in your life, 100%.
We're solid, and we're family at this point. Like, she's the godmother to my oldest daughter. We've been there for the birth of my children and my wedding and all the things. And so just to quickly move forward. So I got in a relationship in treatment for the second time, and I was able to complete the program. I left treatment with 60 days clean, but we were in a relationship, and he's the father of my oldest daughter, Trinity. And so we got together. I got pregnant at 6 months sober. I ended up getting a little apartment, and I got a little job. I got my driver's license. I got a car, and ended up having her. We lived together, and he ended up having to create his own story. He wasn't completely done yet. And so we did end up splitting, because he chose to go get loaded, and he ended up going to prison. for a couple of years. And so I raised her on my own, and I went back to school and I got a master's degree. Got an AA, I got a bachelor's, and then I got a master's degree in counseling psychology. In the midst
That's
of,
incredible.
thank you. Yeah.
That's incredible. That's
Yeah.
incredible.
Yeah,
Master's degree.
I know. I mean, I'm like,
Love that.
broken foster kid junkie. And to see how God makes beauty out of ashes is just incredible to me.
And I'm not surprised with the counseling psychology, because I mean, who better to help somebody who's struggling than somebody who's struggled, right? And you pair that with your education and your recovery, and it's a complete success.
Thank you. Yeah. So education was a huge gift for me because I was like a high school dropout. I was able to get my GED and like did homeschool and like pulled it together. But like, I remember like trying to go back to get my associates in early recovery, and I was terrified. I was like, man, I can't do this. Like, I'm not smart and I don't do school. And God said, no, that's not true. That's not your story.
You are smart, and you do school, and you did school. Not a lot of people have master's degrees, it's a huge achievement.
Yeah. Yeah, it's big. And I'm still in awe of it, truly. The fact that in my profession, it's challenging and it's hard work, but God has revealed recently to me that it's also my ministry, that this is my assignment. And until he tells me to do something different, this is what I'm called to do. But in a professional capacity, to like be a professional person is like wild. Like I still, at 40 years old, 20 years of sobriety, I'm still like, I wake up some mornings, I'm like, what? This is insane, right? So fast forward, my oldest daughter has a slew of health issues that I won't dive into too deeply, but it was a challenge. Lots of medical issues, developmental issues, and she struggled. And then when she was 7, I met my now ex-husband, and we were married for 8 years. And we had my youngest daughter, Audra, who just turned 9 a couple weeks ago. And I mean, I just doing life.
Wow, Audra, that's so great. I have an 8-year-old, so I know in 9 and 8, when you said she may dance through the room, I thought mine too.
That was very hard and traumatizing. I do have a relatively good relationship with my ex-husband now. He has since moved to Florida as well. He lives here, and we co-parent. We do the best that we can. I also, am a huge supporter and a participant in Al-Anon because I've needed that a lot in my life. In later sobriety, it becomes less about holding on to my butt and not drinking, and more about like, how do I do life with other people? So I guess just a couple quick things. So I definitely obviously work the steps. Right now we're working on a book called Emotional Recovery, and it's really good. It's like what you're talking about, right? Like learning how to, this is life on life's terms. And so after my divorce, after he moved out, I did have a season where, I only share this because it's about the progression of the disease, right? That like, I have had so much good and so much pain and all the things. And then, my disease tells me that I don't have one. And so I got into a rebound relationship with some guy, and he was an active alcoholic. And I didn't know that at the time, but as time progressed on, he's definitely an alcoholic. And I almost drank because it was around me all the time. I allowed him to keep it in my fridge. It was working a program the entire time, but I was like in full relapse mode in my mind. Right.
And so how did you get out of that? I would imagine there'd have to be some level of honesty. Like you had to call yourself out at some point.
I did. Yeah. I told my sponsor, and I told, a couple of my really close girlfriends, and I said, man, like, there was this moment where he had left a beer in my fridge and he wasn't there, and that my kids weren't there. And I opened the fridge and I was like, oh man, I could take a drink of this and nobody would even know. Nobody would know. Right. And that was the most terrifying experience. I was like, oh, okay, all right. And because he was in active alcoholism and in total denial, he like didn't know how to respect boundaries. Right. So I would say like, bring alcohol in my home. Don't like leave it in the car. Like, don't, and he just couldn't get it. And so, it was a year. It was a year of back and forth. I knew he was toxic. I knew he was unhealthy, but that's also like a big part of why I feel like God has offered a deeper level of recovery in the last year because of my relationships with men. I just don't want to stay stagnant. It's very tricky to have long-term sobriety. It's tricky.
Sure.
It's tricky regardless, whether you're new, in the middle, whatever. It's all but to be sober for a long time and have a working knowledge of the steps and go to meetings and have a sponsor and be sponsoring and all of these things. And then life shows up, right? And we're like, we get divorced, we get married, we have bankruptcy, we whatever. And we like forget,
Right.
or we think we can do it. So, I did obviously end up ending that relationship. And I just kind of said, like, I'm just going to be with Jesus. I'm just going to hang out. Like, we're moving across the country. We're going to start a new adventure and live our best beach life. And,
Right.
And that was a whole spiritual experience too. Like, just the way that my friends and family showed up and when we prayed and asked God to move. And here we are.
So let's talk for a moment about you writing your memoir and how you came to writing. Is that always something you wanted to do? You do always want to be an author?
I don't know that I always wanted to be an author. I always have loved writing. It was my favorite subject in school was English. As little as like third, fourth grade, that was my favorite. I loved learning about writing and learning about authors and learning about the structure of writing and all the things. It just resonated, it just clicked for me. I know that probably for the last 5 years, God has really placed it on my heart pretty heavily to write a book. I hear it all the time. I hear it in my sleep. I hear it in my waking. I hear it, write a book, write a book, write a book. And, and then the thoughts are, you're not going to, no one's going to read it, just the negative thoughts. So actually like right before probably a couple months before we moved to Florida, I was up at like 5 a.m. and God just woke me up and I'm like, do we really have to do this right now? And he gave me the title and he gave me the chapter names for the first couple chapters. And he started, he said, write this and then write this. So I just wrote it all down in my notebook and then I started typing. And so for me, I think the most powerful thing is that it impacts others. I want it to be something that is a message of hope.
I love your title.
Thank you.
I'm in love with your title. Yeah,
Thank
Wasted. It's perfect. So what would you say for listeners who don't have long-term sobriety? They're kind of where you were, not necessarily when you were running and couch surfing, but like when they were contemplating and thinking about, wow, how do I stop this? Like, what piece of encouragement would you give them to, get off their cycle of addiction and to kind of give this a shot?
Yeah. Thank you for asking that. I think you'll know when you're done, you're done. Try a little bit of sober living and see if you like it. Put your toe in the water, go to a meeting, connect with some other people that are maybe even on the fence and trying to kind of figure out if this is what they want to do. Right. And pick their brain,
Right.
Go to coffee and maybe like even experience a little bit of joy and see if it compares to the life that you're living. Right.
Yes.
It's a big thing for me. I just had tunnel vision. You know what I mean? It was like,
yes,
drink, get loaded, and absorb everyone and everything around me. Use people and suck them dry. And like, just, this is where I live. This is where I live. It's very fantastical. I was really into like witchcraft and paganism and zodiac. And like, I was just always like looking, right?
Wow, yeah.
So God was like, sit down and be quiet and listen, right? And when I went to my first meeting, I was like, these people are nuts. And now I love them. I love alcoholics more than any other group of people on the planet. Like,
yes.
So I think that would be my suggestion. Is you don't have to make a decision today.
Right.
You don't have to have it all figured out in the next 24 hours. Just one step at a time, go to a meeting, make a phone call, give it a shot.
Love it. As you progress in your book, I would love to have you back on as you near the end parts of your book to have you as one of our featured authors. Your message is going to help so many people. So thank you so much for coming on here and having the courage to share it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for asking me. It's such a gift. I truly am so grateful and just honored. So thank you. And thank you for this platform. Thank you for listening and being willing to follow direction in the guiding of the presence of God, right? He told you to do this to help and reach the masses, and you're being obedient to that. So because of that, you're going to change lives. Your podcast is going to change lives. And so I'm grateful to even have like just a little piece of that. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you so much for being here. And I look forward to having you on again. Thank you for tuning into the Sober Living Stories podcast. If you have been inspired, consider subscribing and sharing with anyone who could use hope in their lives. Remember to stay tuned for more inspiring stories in the episodes to come. To view our featured author of the month or to become a guest yourself, visit www.jessicastepanovic.com.